Thank you all for joining us today for Your Public Service Loan Forgiveness Action Plan workshop. Joining us today is Jacquie Caroll, the Director and Program Evaluation and Regional Director West of the AccessLex Institute. She's going to help us understand the requirements of the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Plan and help you get on and stay on track for your forgiveness. And at this moment, I'm going to now hand it over to Jacquie to get us started.
Thank you, Jasmine. I appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. So a couple of things. One is that it looks like the internet was a little bit up and down today. So I want to make sure that you can hear me clearly. Please let Jasmine know that you can hear me clearly, but also be patient with us because it might come in and out, and we'll try and do the best we can. Also, I wanted to do some polls, but we don't have that option. So I'm going to rely on Jasmine, actually, and I'm going to rely on you to put those questions into the poll because I do want to have all of your questions answered. I know there's a lot of information floating around right now about public service loan forgiveness. It is very, very interesting. And so I do want to start off with those burning questions. You know, what is it that you really want to know? And I saw some things came into the chat already. I'm going to give you another just 2 minutes to really think about what do you want to know? The things that often people want to know is, hey, is it going to go away? What about this temporary stuff? How do I qualify it for it right now? What happens if I'm no longer eligible for public service loan forgiveness? How do I make myself eligible? You know, so all those things are floating right now in the national discussion. So take a moment and again, put those questions into the chat panel, and then I'm going to give Jasmine a moment to read out all the things that you want to know about so that I can then help integrate that and sprinkle it into this presentation. And while they're doing that, I know, Jasmine, that you already had a few of them at the very beginning. So the other thing I'm interested in is where you are in your station in life. Have you graduated? Are you working? Are you still going to school? You know, some of those things are also going to be of interest to me. So far, what have you gotten, Jasmine? So I can no longer hear you.
Oh, I was muted. Sorry, guys.
Oh,
All
I'm
right.
sorry. Okay. I was going to, the technology issues begin. So,
My
okay, no problem.
mistake. Okay, so I do have a bunch of questions coming in. I just posted the poll number 1. So these are the burning questions, and then I have questions 1 through 5. If you guys want to ask those questions, just go ahead and maybe type the number, and then I can let Jacquie know what is the most demand, like what question is most in demand. But to answer Jackie's question, so let me start at the top here. I have a question. It reads, does it take 10 years to forgive loans after working for nonprofit?
Great question. I'm going to address that. What's
Okay.
the next one?
The next one is public service going to be defined in this presentation? Currently, I am a classified staff member at CSN. Would this count towards public service?
Excellent. Also going to address that. Perfect.
Great. The third one we have is first they start by saying, my question might be answered by learning more here. How long does one need to work at a nonprofit to be able to qualify? Can the loans be forgiven before 10 years of repayment?
Excellent.
And how much is forgiven?
Awesome. Love it. All right. And what'd you get back on the polls?
So as far as the polls go, I have vote for 2. And I also have a bunch more other just
go for it. Let's hear it
too.
Yes, let's hear
great.
it because I want to kind of know what's going on so that I can point out when we get to that section where it applies.
Okay, great. So here's one. It reads, I thought I understood PSLF, but with the recent changes, I'm not sure I still understand the program.
I appreciate that.
And then in parentheses, what payments apply? What paperwork is involved? Should I consolidate my loans? Do some of the payments I've made in the past actually apply now? And I'm sure that I'll have more questions as we go.
Awesome.
Then there's this question, is government included, including city, state, county, and federal? And I have, what happens if you return to school and take out more loans? Does your 10-year process start again after you finish your degree?
Awesome.
Do past jobs apply towards forgiveness? And do I need to be in repayment to get on the PSLF program?
Awesome.
Right. And then I have votes for number one, which is what is PSLF and how is it different from other forgiveness plans? And number five, do private loans qualify for PSLF?
Love
So
it.
those are all our questions.
Nice. Okay, thank you for letting me know all of those. So let's get going. Let's start off with what we're really talking about now, which is there's a lot of talk about public service, right? So it was created 2007. It took a while for Congress to really figure out how to administrate it. And so the first really public service loan forgiveness applications came in about 2017 and 2018, and it turned out that about 99% of them were denied. And, you know, I'm going to skip the poll on this one and just tell you why they were denied. So the first thing is about public service loan forgiveness is that you have to meet certain elements. And until you meet all of those elements, you don't really apply for public service loan forgiveness. The number one element that was missing for 99% of these applications were missing payments and actually making the payment. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. So what's going on right now is we have really three things going on at the same time. We have until October 31st, which is a special public service loan forgiveness that was created with this administration to ensure that they're really trying to fix what they messed up in the past because the information was confusing in the past. Borrowers didn't know really were they in the right plan? Did they need to be in a different plan? All those type of things. So right now until October 31st, and this might apply to some of you, the following is true. If you were, for example, in school since 2000 and let's see, well, if you've been working maybe since 2007 or even before that, and you had federally consolidated loans in the federal FELP program, this temporary forgiveness right now is going to actually apply. And one of the things that they're allowing you to do right now is to consolidate those federal student loans that were FELP loans into the correct student loan repayment plan, which has to be a direct student loan repayment plan. And I'll talk about some of those a little bit later. So that's the one thing. Then if you do that, if you had employment that would be eligible between 2007, October of 2007 and now, you can submit for those employers, and I'll show you how to do that, and receive credit for prior employment. So that's really what's going on right now. That's the one thing. And that is until October 31st. You can use the QR code here on the screen if you want to see more about that announcement. There's actually some talk potentially that they could extend it past October 31st, but I'm not 100% sure about that. So I would go with October 31st. So if that is something that you think applies to you, later on, I'm also going to give you some information how you can reach out to me and I can help you walk through that process one-on-one to figure out where you are in the process, what we need to do and things like that. But this is the biggest thing that's going on. Once that goes away, the regular roadmap is really that you need to meet these elements, the right loans, the right plan, a qualifying employer, full-time employment, 120 payments, and that all the paperwork is completed. Those are the 6 elements that you must meet. And after you meet all of them, then you apply for public service loan forgiveness. So the great news is, for those of you that asked, hey, will prior jobs apply? They could. They absolutely could. And we'll talk about that. And also some of you asked, will my current job apply? It sounds like it could. And you're going to be in a specific step in this roadmap. So think about it from that perspective. Where are you on the roadmap? So we're going to look at what are the right type of loans, what's the right plan, qualifying employers, full-time, the actions you need to take, and the paperwork. And then again, just really think about where am I? What do I need to do as my next steps? So let's look at the right loans. Like I said, what you need right now, and again, once the temporary public service loan forgiveness that is available until October 31st is gone, it's going to go back to this. This is the standard, and they're going to be, again, administrated just the way that it reads in the law right now. So the loans that qualify are any loan that has the word direct in it, a direct subsidized, direct unsubsidized, direct grad plus, direct consolidation. It has to have those names in the student loan to be eligible. Again, individuals that may have a FEL loan would need to consolidate those into the direct loan program in order to meet that eligibility requirement before October 31st. The way you identify if you have the correct loan, so direct is correct, keep that in your mind. If it's direct, it's correct. You're going to log in to studentaid.gov, and you can see at the top right-hand corner, it says log in. When you log in there, you will use the drop-down menu. About the third one down, it'll say My Aid. Click on that, and it'll show you all of the aid that you ever received at the Department of Education, including grants and including loans. So I'm going to actually tell you right here, right now, this is going to be applicable for the debt relief. The Biden administration debt relief program is different than public service loan forgiveness. However, it might benefit you to go in here to see, one, did you ever receive a Pell Grant? Because if you did receive a Pell Grant, there is going to be the debt relief program where they're going to have the application ready in the middle of August. And it sounds like you have to apply to be eligible. And the way that it's going to work is you're going to apply and say you're going to get the $10,000 of debt relief, which doesn't make any difference if you were in public service or non-public service. It's just that you had debt before June of 2022. And the other criteria is going to be that you had 125,000 AGI or less for a person of one and 250,000 AGI for two. But again, if you had Pell Grant ever, and the only time you get Pell Grant is in your undergrad. And so you'll need to look at your undergrad grant and loan profile in studentaid.gov and see if you had grants. Click on the grants and it'll say, hey, you had Pell Grant or you had this kind of grant. And then you can apply studentaid.gov for the debt relief. They did talk about making some of it automatic. However, there was a recent lawsuit by somebody who said, if you make this automatic, I'm going to have to pay taxes on that $10,000, and I'm in public service and I don't want to pay any taxes on it because it all would be forgiven. So I think the Department of Education is opting for, you're just going to have to opt in if you want the debt relief. So the second thing is, go ahead.
Jacquie,
Yes.
sorry. There's a question here, a couple questions. I think they just want clarification. It reads, can one get credit for prior years if they were worked before some loans were taken out?
So it's going to depend, right? So one of the things that it's going to depend on, the one criteria is that you had to be in repayment. So if you had some loans and you were making payments on them and you were working for an eligible employer and you met all the other, full time, and you made the payment and you started making those payments, and then later on you received new loans, the Department of Education right now is saying that they're going to count those prior payments, and then the new loans are going to count to your new total, but you're still only going to have to get to 120. So they will run them concurrently. So you'll receive the prior loans, credit for that. And then when the new loans run parallel, they're going to count, maybe now you're at 100, now then you're 101, 102, 103, 104 for both loans, and only the one. So it's going to be forgiven for both of them. Let's just say it that way.
Okay, the second question is, if someone received a Pell Grant during undergrad, but the loans are all graduate, does that count?
The criteria for the debt relief is that you had to have loans, which doesn't matter if they're graduate or undergraduate, and two, that you received a Pell Grant. And the Pell Grant is only applicable for undergraduate. So yes, it would count based on the way the legislation is written right now. Thank you. Those are great questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Jacquie. You can
You're welcome. All right. Again, if some of you on the webinar today had older loans, like those FELP loans, you would actually consolidate them into the direct loan program right here. You'd log into your account and you would find maybe those loans that are FELP loans or old Perkins loans, consolidate them into the FELP using this just login start button. It's relatively easy. So that's the very first thing, identifying, do you have the right loans? The second element of this puzzle is that you have to have the right plan. The right plans are listed as of now as the income contingent, the old IBR, the new IBR, the pay and the repay, and the standard 10-year. Now, you might ask yourself, why is the standard 10-year plan in there? Because 120 payments is 10 years, right? One of the things that happens quite frequently is when people are in these plans, they miss the recertification deadline. So when you are an income-driven plan, it is based on your income from your prior year. So you need to recertify for the next year, and you need to do that all 10 years or however long you're going to be in that plan. And so that takes usually about 2 months. So you need to give yourself at least 2 months to complete the paperwork, and definitely keep copies of everything, because if you can't prove it, it didn't happen. The most common repayment options that people choose, of course, is the income driven, the IBR, the pay as you earn, and the repayee. Here's also one thing I want you to know is you can change plans. So if you ever select a plan and then it turns out not to be the right plan for you, you can actually change plans. There are just some small nuances at the back end as far as the way that interest capitalizes, or what type of payment you need to make before you can go into another plan. And you can read more about it on studentaid.gov. You can see right down there, what is the income-driven plan? Really breaks it into a lot of detail. Again, if you read through some of that and then you have some questions, I'll show you how you can make a one-on-one coaching session with me. I'll be happy to kind of talk through some of those things with you. All right, so now type into the chat panel or into the other panel, really, how much do you expect to earn? Or some of you, how much are you earning? Or, because I want you to see how they're calculating. So that's a great question on that just dropped down. I saw that on the income-driven plans. So the way that income-driven plans generally work is that if you have, for example, borrowed $100,000 and you make $100,000, you do not have what's called a financial hardship, because really it's very equal. However, if you borrowed $100,000, but you're only earning $50,000, then there's a disconnect, right? One is a lot more than the other. And it's that financial disconnect that makes you eligible for income-driven plans. Once you are in an income-driven plan, let's say you started in an income-driven plan with a lower salary, then, and as you progress through it, your salary increases, they can't kick you out of it once you were in it. However, if you were in a different plan, maybe like a debt-driven plan, like the standard repayment plan or an extended repayment plan, and then you try to move into an income-driven plan, you might be limited based on, do you have a financial hardship, which is generally speaking, how much debt do you have compared to what you're earning? Jasmine, are there any other questions on that one?
There are no other questions.
Okay.
Did you want me to put that poll question in
Yes.
the chat?
I'd love to kind of get them to think about, and you don't have to, I really want you just to think about how much you are earning, and you can put that into the chat panel, because it's going to be based on your adjusted gross income. So I want to show you how these calculations currently work. So you take your adjusted gross income, and there are a couple of adjustments. One of the adjustments you can take is that you can take a deduction for your student loan interest. So whatever your gross salary would be minus your adjusted income, that's what the income-driven payments, that's what they use. The second thing that they do is then they protect a certain amount. And this is actually where I'd love to get some information into the chat panel. What do you think? This is kind of old. Congress is doing some of this, and sometimes they're not up to date. What do you think? How much income are they protecting? So they're protecting 150% above the federal poverty line. So type into the chat panel what you think the poverty line is. Like if you earn $1 more over this amount, you're not considered in the poverty line, right? What do you think it is? Because this is very important. This is what they're calculating, the amount that they're going to protect from your income, so that it doesn't count towards discretionary. So I'm kind of interested to see where you are. So person of one, what's the poverty line? Okay, I see some of those coming in. Thank you, Esther. So the poverty line for one, again, it's going to be probably a little shocking. It's $12,000. Oh, Savi, got it. Or Savi,
Nice.
awesome. So think about that. $12,000 in the 48 contiguous states of the US. It's a little bit higher in Hawaii and in Alaska because of the additional costs, but there's no place you can live, nowhere, for $12,000, right? So what they're protecting is 150% above the poverty line, which gets you to about that $19,000. So let's say you had $60,000 of adjusted gross income, and then you subtract the $19,000 that's going to give you about $41,000 left over. And then depending on the plan, they're going to take 10%, 15%, or 20% of what they consider is your discretionary income. We have a really good handout that you can get at accesslex.org. It's the federal loan repayment plans at a glance. And it kind of shows you all of the plans, the loan types, the eligible borrowers. The biggest thing to look forward to is the married borrower section. And what's important in that one is that all of the plans, so let's say you're doing public service. If you're doing public service and you're trying to get your loans forgiven, really your goal is to pay the least amount for the shortest amount of time, right? Your goal is to benefit from public service. So with that in mind, the only plan that would not allow you to separate out your income would be the last one, which is the revised pay as you earn. So if you had a goal of paying the least amount for the shortest amount of time, you might have a spouse who's also a high income earner, and you might need to separate and file separately so that you can maximize actually the benefit of reducing your payment. And so revised pay as you earn is the only one where you cannot do that. And again, you can see that generally income-based 10%, the pay as you earn 10%, and then repay is also 10%. Also, what you can see is that there is the years towards forgiveness. The blue line indicates, which is a 0 to 10, means that this is an eligible plan that is eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So the quickest time you could get loan forgiveness on this plan is if you were meeting all of the elements for 10 years. That's what that blue line indicates. However, the other thing we know as a nation, because we have ADP payroll records and people pay taxes, we know that the debt burden, the financial debt burden from student loans really is a lot greater, that most people have a financial hardship as it comes to paying back student loans. And so these loans were created, and the orange line indicates that even if you were not participating in public service, the orange line actually indicates that you could stay in this plan for 20 or 25 years and receive forgiveness for that plan as well. But the difference between public service and the current just forgiveness plan would be that that would be taxed. So I'm going to stop for a minute here and just add a couple of things. One, the debt relief that Biden administration is proposing on a federal level is not going to be taxed. That's the one thing. So whoever applies for the $10,000 or $20,000, that's not taxed. That's not non-taxable event at the federal level. It sounds like there are some states that may be taxing that benefit at the state level, but it's not entirely clear. Now, of course, Nevada, no income tax for the state, so doesn't even matter for you, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is there are some discussions right now to making changes to public service loan forgiveness. And one of the changes is actually to make it in chunks. So if you work 2 or 3 years in public service, you can get 20 or 30% forgiven. And then if you work another 2 years, you get another, instead of having to wait the whole 120 and 10 days, 120 and 10 years. The other thing that they're talking about is creating a completely new repayment plan. And this repayment plan potentially would not accrue any interest. It maybe is considered to forgive also all debt after 10 years or 20 years. And so that's still in the works. We're not entirely sure how that's going to go, but I expect that that is going to come probably out by the end of this year. Then the only thing that's important there is the plan that they're talking about might be something like that revised pay as you earn down here at the bottom, where if you have undergrad debt and grad debt, that they would split it out. For example, you would not have, instead of 10% completely of your discretionary, they would calculate it a weighted average, 5% maximum of your undergraduate debt. And then if you have graduate debt, they would also do a weighted average of that and then make that a calculation for your discretionary payments. So it would most likely never go over 10%. That could help a lot of people. Not going on right now yet, but they are talking about it. So as I mentioned earlier, 50% of borrowers forget to recertify their incomes. And when you stop recertifying your income, then you go automatically into the standard repayment plan, which is usually the very highest plan. It's the quickest way to pay it off. 10 years has the least amount of interest, but it is a larger payment. So Again, if you're in income-driven plans, be sure to put that on your calendar. At least give yourself 2 months to complete the paperwork, because there are interest subsidy rules, the trigger events for capitalization, and it might have implications for loan forgiveness. So the right loans are the direct loans. The right plans are any of those income-driven plans plus the standard repayment plan. Let's look at qualifying employers. I know that some of you have put some questions into the chat panel about the type of employer, and I'll talk about this. So there are some specific qualifying employers. Actually, do all of you, type into the chat panel where everybody is working right now. So let me know if you're working state, federal, local, tribal, 501c. Type that into the chat panel so I can kind of see where we are.
Okay, I've got 3 answers for state.
Okay, perfect.
Another state, just strolled in, 2 more states.
Okay.
Local,
Okay.
1 local.
Let's see what, we'll have to, a question, local might be, let's see what happens with local. All right.
UNLV and private business.
Okay, combination.
Formerly nonprofit, currently for-profit, and then with a spouse that is state.
Okay, awesome. All right, so here's the thing. A qualifying employer is very clearly defined. So it is a government entity, whether it's state, federal, local, or tribal. So that would be local state government, right? Then 501c, there are certain exemptions for some private institutions that are providing a certain type of qualifying public service, but that's really far and few between. And then there's AmeriCorps and that. One way that you can really find out if you have a qualifying employer or if your previous employer is qualified is to go back on to studentaid.gov. And what you can do there is you can use the self-help, the PSLF self-help tool, or they call the PSLF Ninja. What you will do there is you can type in your employer's identification number and it will tell you, yes, this is a qualifying employer, or you can put in their name and it'll do the same thing. I find that the employer identification number is often the easiest to use because sometimes we just say different things about employers in different ways. So for a qualifying employer, it's very specifically defined. Again, you can double check everything on studentaid.gov. However, also when I show you later on the employment certification form, it has 6 pages, and the first 2 are really the application for it, and pages 3 to 6 are specific details on how to identify. It's like a flow chart to identify if you have a qualifying employer. So that's a really good resource. So let's look at full-time employment. I know some of you said you're doing a little bit of both. So this is very specific. Right now, full-time employment as defined federally is that you have to work for a qualifying employer and it has to be full-time. And full-time is defined by your employer. However, if your employer defines full-time as less than 30 hours a week, it would not count. You would actually have to get 2 part-time employers to add 30 hours. So if your employer is like a normal employer says, hey, 40 hours is full-time, then you have to work 40 hours in order to be considered eligible and to meet this component. If you're working 32 hours, and that's not what they define as full-time, it wouldn't qualify. However, again, if you're in a situation where you're not entirely clear if you have that full-time marker, you can add multiple part-time employers to reach the 30 hours. And the way that that usually works is somebody might be working one regular part-time job and maybe doing teaching on the side. And so they might have, they might be an adjunct faculty and then they combine both their part-time job and that other part-time faculty job into the 30 hours. There's actually some specific guidelines for that. Does anybody have any questions on the qualifying employers' hours, the hour thing in particular?
I do have a quick question. So at UNLV, I believe it's 40 hours. And if that's not correct, somebody correct me. But if it is 40 hours, and for example, graduate assistants, our graduate assistants are state employees. They work up to 20 hours. but oftentimes they also have an additional 10 that gets into the 30. If they were to work like another part-time nonprofit, would they have to get up to the 40?
No, that's a great question. That's a great question. So if you have graduate assistants and their regular job is consisted of 20 hours, then if they get another job, all they need to get is another 10 hours. And then those two jobs combined, they only have to reach 30. It's only if they have a full-time job at an institution and that full-time job doesn't meet the requirements of at least 30, and you are maybe not doing 40 hours if that's required at UNLV, then you would have to get the extra one. So your graduate assistants, their 20 hours would be good. And then if they have another job for 10 hours and combine those, then they would meet the full-time employment requirement.
And does the type of employment matter if it's like student worker versus classified versus admin faculty?
So what matters is not the type of work that they're doing, but it goes back to, are they doing it for a qualifying employer? So is it a state, federal, public, 501c? Those are the requirements. So it has to be an eligible employer. And then the other one is meeting the hours. So it would have to be two eligible employers if they have two different jobs, regardless of what the job is. Okay, you're welcome. All right, then I'll move on. So now it's all about the payments. And really the soonest that you can get it is at after 120. That was actually the number one thing. Missing payments was the number one thing that the first applicants, those 99% that were denied, that's what happened. And so here are the requirements for payments. And so the payment must be scheduled. And a scheduled means that you are not in a deferment or a forbearance of any kind, with the exception of right now. Right now, you are in the CARES Act forbearance, which will count towards public service loan forgiveness if you are full-time employed still during COVID. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But let's say you were not doing that and maybe you're just getting ready to graduate. Once you graduate and your payments become due, that means they're scheduled. Somebody's really asking you, make a payment. That's a scheduled payment. And so those have to be on time within 15 days. I find it that if you're really going for PSLF, the easiest thing to do is to schedule it, do it an automatic, debit deduction, so that it's always going to be within 15 days of the due date. You always know it's on time. It's always going to be made full. And that's important because some payments were denied if there were typos in it. Let's say it was off 2 cents. It was not considered as counted. And again, for individuals that might have the prior loans in the FELP program, if they consolidate those loans into the direct loan program, any payments that also met the other requirements of an eligible employer and scheduled payments would count as of October 1st of 2007. There was also some things that, it's kind of a good news, bad news thing. It used to be that previously, for example, people sometimes if they got a windfall, they would say, hey, you know what, I'm going to put it all on, try to get this paid down faster. And what servicers would do, they would do something that's not in your best interest. Instead of paying down the principal, what they would do is they would say, hey, you know what, Jackie, you don't have to pay. You just gave us that $500. You don't have to pay for the next 5 months. Well, if I didn't have to pay for the next 5 months, guess what? Then it's not a scheduled payment. So even though I made the payment for those 5 months, they wouldn't have counted. Now they're allowing to actually count that. So that is one of the good things. However, like I said, if you're doing public service loan forgiveness, your goal is to pay the least amount for the shortest amount of time. I would say set it and forget it. And if you have a windfall, keep that windfall for something else. You just never know. I mean, we definitely learned during COVID that, things can change at the drop of a hat. The last element, of course, is the paperwork. And it really is that, I'm very green and I try not to print anything out. I want to save the planet, all those type of things. But with public service loan forgiveness, I am completely opposite. I would say document, keep records of everything. Servicers in the past prior now to the new ones were very clear about what their job was. They said their job was not to help students identify the correct plan or help them with decision making about what would be the right choice. Their really primary responsibility is to collect the money. So they were not very helpful. And that also means that sometimes people would send in documents, they got lost, they couldn't verify it, and then they fell out of their repayment plans. So document everything until you have the final, here's what I've applied. You've been granted forgiveness. Take a screenshot of that, print it out, keep it in multiple medias, because again, you just need to document it. If you can't document it, it may not have happened. So this is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Form, which has a much longer name right there. And it's also very confusing because we use this form for several different things. We use this form to determine an eligible employer. That's by checking the first box right there in section 2. But you also, and this is one of the things I would encourage you to do if you have not done this before, I would encourage you to complete this employer certification form every single year, because as you can see in box 1, you also have a right to an annual audit. Like, I just want to find out how many qualifying payments I have made so far. So when you do this form every year, they essentially have to let you know how many qualifying payments you have. So it's not, in year 1, 12, in year 2, maybe another 10 counted, in year 3, maybe another, so exactly where you are at. And when you get to 120, then it takes the guesswork out of it. Again, 99% of people thought that they had all payments and they did not. I would encourage you again to do this annually. The other reason, because sometimes employers don't exist anymore. In particular, nonprofits. I worked for a nonprofit about 15 years ago. That's no longer in existence. And so I had a very difficult time trying to verify that employer existed. So that also kind of keeps you up with that. The other thing is that they're using this form for regular public service loan forgiveness or the temporary extended public service loan forgiveness. The temporary expanded public service loan certification was actually created after all those 99% of the people got denied. They're like, oh, we're going to try and fix that. So they're using that form for that as well. So that's kind of what the confusing thing is. But if you have an eligible employer, you're going to get this form. You're going to complete your Social Security, date of birth, name, address, all those type of things. You're going to select at least box number 1. If you have an old program, and let's say you've been paying since 2007 and you consolidated your loans, you might even check box number 2 and box number 3. Then you're going to send that to your HR department or whoever the person is responsible for signing this form. And they're going to document that you were working at a public entity from such and such date to such and such date, which might be still including working for them right now, and that you were full-time. Then they will send that back to you. And then that is the form that you submit to the servicer right now. Once you have done that 120 times, then you actually submit this form one last time and say, I believe I've qualify for forgiveness. And again, if you do the audit every year, there should be no guesswork. You know exactly when you have 120 payments. This was the PSLF help tool that I talked about. You can use the screenshot. It'll get you right to it. Again, they've done a really good job over the last few years to try and make this a much more transparent, much more user-friendly experience. And so I think you will like it. Again, use the employer identification number, which you can find on your W-2s, to go with that. So the question I had a poll question here about, I wanted to ask you, since they have tried to fix this, public service loan forgiveness has actually worked. And I thought maybe you could type into the chat panel how much you think the average loan service forgiveness is. And I did give Jasmine a range of numbers that you can choose from, and maybe she can put that into the chat panel. But on average, not those 99% that originally started, but since then we've had quite a success with it, especially with the temporary public service loan forgiveness. So what do you think? What's the number one on average? How much are people getting forgiven?
Monica says the 43 K. There's 2 votes for 58 K. Actually 4 votes for the 58 427.
All right. All right. It is actually the 70s. It's in the 70s.
Wow.
So on average, so it makes it worth, right? It makes it worth the time and effort. You're going to have to fill out the form every year. You're going to make sure that it's on time and you have to do all those things. But then, to have, $78,000 forgiven without tax implications, that's pretty darn good. So it's worth your time. This is the new servicer. Mohila is the new servicer. It used to be Fed Loan Servicing, but there are several servicers leaving the industry right now because people have been complaining. They haven't been doing a good job. They hadn't had students' best interests at heart. They gave borrowers conflicting and incorrect information, and the Department of Education is really trying to make this a better experience and also hold true to the promises that were made. And I find that with this administration, I think that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to kind of get on the field that we should have been on all along. Now, there are some risks, right? Because we have heard talk about public service going away. Do I think it's going to go away? I don't think it's going to go away because really we do know that most of the time there's a disconnect between how much students have to borrow and how much they're going to earn in most of their careers. And so we know that there needs to be, the baby boomers are going to retire, and those public service sector jobs necessarily are not high paying jobs. So I don't think it's going to go away. I believe like it could change though. Like I said, there are some discussions in Congress right now about changing the program. And one of the changes is that they kind of mirror the Apple program that they used to have, which was a teacher forgiveness program. So if you worked a couple of years, then they forgive you, 20%. If you worked another 33 years, just 3 years, they would give you another 30% and kind of so on and so forth, instead of having it to be, all 120 payments before they forgive anything. Now, you might change careers. Now, some of you, I think, mentioned you were doing some public sector work and then also some private sector work, and maybe it's what's going to happen if you change careers. So the thing is, that 120 payments does not have to be consecutive. So it definitely could be that maybe you worked for a public service entity 5 years ago and you worked for them for 8 years, and so now you're going to go in and certify that employer and get credit for those 8 years, and then now you're again working for a new employer and maybe you have 2 years left. So it could have taken you 15 years completely, but you still only made 120 payments. So if you change careers, going in and out of public service is going to be okay. If you change careers completely from going from public service into the private sector, again, at this point, we still have Plan B for all of these federal income-driven plans, the orange plan, right? So if you're in that plan because you started in that plan because you thought you're going to do public service, and then you're like, ugh, not going to do it, but you're still eligible to continue on in the plan. After 20 years, that plan is also forgiven. And at this point, it's taxed. Again, they are talking about changing those elements as well. And they are leaning significantly towards actually doing that without a tax penalty as well. So instead of the 10 years, let's say you're in it for 20 years. After that point, it would also be forgiven if they create that new plan. And the reason being is because they know most of us, again, with the debt levels that you have from school, current inflation rates and all those type of things, if you can't pay higher than 10% of your discretionary income right now, most likely if you get a tax liability at the end of that 20 years, you're also not going to be able to pay that. We have a calculator at accesslex.org that you can use. Actually, we're going to have the new one rolled out in about 2 or 3 weeks. But one of the things that you can do in there is you can put in the amount that you borrowed. It's kind of designed for lawyers, but really anybody can use it. And it shows you what your monthly payments are. And also you can try the different type of income-driven plans. And so it'll do that calculation. So really, again, the roadmap is the right type of loans. They have to be direct. The right type of plan. It's an income-driven plan, a qualifying employer defined as with the PSLF help tool or within the pages 3 through 6 on the form, full-time employment, at least 30 or what's defined by your employer, and then 120 payments, and then of course all of the paperwork. Here are some resources that you can use. Definitely studentaid.gov, awesome. You can use AccessLex. Access Connects is where you can schedule some free one-on-one coaching to talk about what next steps you need to take. So definitely. And here's another thing. We also have a huge piece of legislative advocacy. So if you are so inclined, right now, members of Congress are listening. And it's really cool. You just go to accesslex.org/advocacy and then go and type in your zip code, and you will get every member of Congress all the way up to the presidency as who are your represented members of Congress and the Senate and things like that. And then you can email them. Right now, they're listening. They're listening right now because they're contemplating changes to PSLF. They're contemplating coming in with newer repayment plans that might be less than 10%. Call them, email them. I have I've had to use my local senator twice because I needed help, and they get things done. So don't hesitate. Take a screenshot of this if you want. Again, this is free. This is nationwide. It's any one-on-one financial aid, loan repayment, PSLF, counseling, coaching, as often as you want, 30-minute sessions. And please feel free to share this with all of your friends. So I'm just going to leave it on this one and see if we have any other questions. And I want to make sure I answered everybody's questions. So let's kind of go back to that. Right now, you have an opportunity to clarify.
Great. We also did have a couple questions roll through in the past couple minutes or so. I'm going to scroll back and find them. Okay, so first, it reads, I'm a little confused. I paid $30K last year towards multiple student loans while in forbearance. Does that count towards the number of payments?
Great. So the first question on that is, did you make those payments in a direct loan program or in the FELP loan program? That's going to make a difference. If you made those payments in the direct loan program, actually you could ask for a refund and it could count under the forbearance. They will, though, count as a payment made, even though you didn't have to make them under the direct loan program. If they were in the federal loan program, they're going to count. If you consolidate your loans into the direct loan program, they will count towards your 120, but you would not get an overpayment refund from any FELP loan payments that you made in the last 2 years. For that one, again, sounds like there could be some fine nuances, and maybe we just need to talk about it a little bit more detail, schedule a one-on-one, and so that I can kind of get a little bit more background and clarity about where you are, the type of loans and things like that.
Okay. The next question is the temporary expanded PSLF different from the 20K forgiveness that Biden passed?
It is. Perfect. That's a great question. Those are two different things. The Biden administration plan is called debt relief. So whenever they're talking about $10,000 and $20,000, it's debt relief for everybody, anybody that ever borrowed a student loan and or had Pell Grants. Public service loan forgiveness is only applicable to those individuals that meet all 6 of those criteria: the right loan, the right plan, the right employer, full-time. So those are 2 distinct, separate programs going on at the same time. Great question.
Thank you, Jackie. The next one reads, does it matter if your loans were in deferment when you made some payments?
It depends. So it depends on when they were. They're actually going back right now to some of, and this might be a nuance. So without knowing everything, I'm just going to say it depends. So what's going on is that the Department of Education did realize that servicers advised borrowers to go into deferments or forbearances when they were not necessary. They could have went into an income-driven plan, and then that would have counted. The only time that it will apply is during this CARES Act. Everyone that was in the direct loan program was automatically in an administrative forbearance, and those payments that you didn't make will count as eligible payments of 0 if you meet all the requirements of an eligible employer and full-time employment, the right, those type of things.
Sorry, Jackie, would you mind repeating some of the things you said? Your audio cut out for a bit there when you were talking about the deferment question.
Okay, so generally speaking, deferment or forbearance, it would not count towards a payment. However, the only exception is right now with the CARES Act, because that is an administrative forbearance that everybody that has a direct loan is on. And if you're still employed for an eligible full-time employer, those payments would count. They are doing a review of prior deferments and forbearances by the Department of Education because servicers were kind of misleading students and putting them in those because it benefited the servicer and not the borrower. So it's possible on a case-by-case basis, some prior deferments or forbearances could have counted. If it was a standard in-school deferment, it would not count.
Thanks, Jackie. I hope that answered the question. Sorry, do we have another question?
I did have another question. You mentioned earlier in the presentation that you can't get kicked out of an income-driven plan, but like, let's say, for example, you have a spouse who does make a decent wage, but then you work in public service and you decide to file separately, you do the income-driven plan, and then eventually down the line, the taxes end up getting so much that you decide to file together again. What happens?
Nothing. It's every year is distinctly different because you have to certify every year to be eligible in that plan. You can change from year to year. 1 year, file separately. Next year, file not separately. For example, if you had a spouse and all of a sudden they weren't employed anymore, it would benefit you to file jointly because you'd have a lower payment.
But they wouldn't actually like boot you from an income-driven repayment
They wouldn't.
plan.
No, the way you file taxes does not have anything to do with the eligibility on it. It's the initial eligibility is a financial hardship. So having a disconnect between the amount of money that you borrowed and the amount of money that you're capable of repaying.
And the most that they'll cap, the most your payment would be is the 20% of the discretionary income.
Yes, and that is if you use the income contingent plan, which is an old plan. So, that's not the best plan. Ideally, you'd want to identify a plan that is maybe 10%. And again, there's 3 plans available with the only one that you cannot separate out income is the repay.
Thank you, Jackie.
You're welcome. And I would encourage you, please do make a one-on-one with me. Go with Access. Actually, we have 10 other people that are all certified accredited financial counselors. Some of them are lawyers, some of them are doctors like myself, some of them are investment specialists. I mean, we have all kinds of people and we're all perfect, Monica. I'll see you soon. Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Yes. Before I pose this next question, I did just want to point out to the participants, before you guys all log off, if you could just please take a few minutes to fill out a workshop feedback survey for us at the Grad Academy. I put the link to the survey in the chat. It really means a lot to us and it helps us improve the workshops that we provide for you and other students. So go ahead and click on that link in the chat. And then the one question that I have to circle back on is, it reads, just making sure I understand, you have to have already paid at least 120 payments before you can apply for the forgiveness program, right?
Yes, so you have to meet all 5 elements and you have to have made 120 payments. And then the last step that you would take is submit and request public service loan forgiveness after you've made 120 payments. So if you haven't made them to date, you are in the process and you're going to follow those 6 steps until you have 120 payments. If you are a borrower from like 2007 and earlier, you may have already made 120 payments. All you need to do is consolidate your loan into the direct loan program and your loans would be forgiven at the point generally that the consolidation is complete, is the pattern that has been going on.
Great, thank you, Jackie. If you guys have any other questions, we're about 2 minutes over time, but if there are any like last minute questions, I'm sure Jackie would be happy to take 1 or 2. And then before ending today's session, I just want to thank you, Jackie, again for sharing your time and your expertise with us. Also, a big thank you to everyone who attended our workshop today. As I said before, if you could go ahead and fill out the workshop feedback survey that I dropped in the chat, that would be super helpful. And I do hope that everyone has a great rest of their day.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Again, make a one-on-one. Let's talk.